Or two, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, I think we can begin now.
Let's go for it and take it away, John.
All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our 2022 Commercial Real Estate Roundtable, where we will look at what's happened in the past year, and our esteemed panelists will predict what is going to happen in 2022. I'd like to thank you all for participating, and I will do brief introductions of each of our panelists in alphabetical order. First, we have Paul Adler, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at Rand Commercial. Paul is an attorney, veteran commercial real estate broker, and creative development professional who has an outstanding reputation as an industry leader throughout the New York State, New Jersey, and New York City area for more than 4 decades. Next, we've got Bill Cuddy, who is Executive Vice President at CBRE. Bill is a trusted commercial real estate professional servicing the needs of his clients on a regional, national, and international basis. As Executive Vice President, working from CBRE's Westchester Fairfield office, he provides consulting and brokerage services to corporations, landlords, and institutions. Next, we have Tom LaPerch, who is the Director of the Commercial Group at Houlihan Lawrence Commercial. Tom combines more than 30 years of successful real estate experience with considerable expertise in marketing and government land planning throughout the Hudson Valley and in Putnam County. Next, we've got Kathy Zamachanski, who is the President and Broker of KZA Realty Group based in the Bronx. Kathy helps commercial real estate practitioners and has developed a consulting firm and has helped spearhead the commercial revitalization in the Bronx through her efforts through the Economic Development Corporation here. So thank you all for participating today. And I guess I'd like to kick it off. I've been moderating this panel for about 10 or 12 years now. And for the last few years, we've talked quite a bit about how well the market has been, how the commercial real estate market has enjoyed historically low interest rates and easy money. 2 years ago, COVID threw a punch to our face. And, we're certainly still dealing with the effects of it as we deal with the Omicron portion of it right now. How would you say the commercial real estate market is faring in your world, in your sphere of the industry? So whoever wants to start off, please do.
John, go ahead, Paul.
No, go ahead.
No, Paul, go ahead. You first, please. You got the bow tie. You look better than I do. Go.
Well, that's holding up my pants. So, first of all, thanks to Hudson Gateway Association and for hosting this yearly. It really is a highlight of the commercial calendar to have this. And thanks to you, John, for always proving to be a better moderator than they are on Meet the Press. And you do a great job with that. I think that it's that Dickens Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times and it was the worst of times. And it really depends on what market sector you're looking at. Clearly, we saw in the region of Orange, Rockland, Westchester, the industrial and commercial flex, all hot to the touch. We saw an uptick in medical office space, did not see a return of the traditional office space in the way that we would normally have seen that. Multifamily and land development was also hot to the touch, where folks were investing in a very positive way. And I say that because we saw a great uptick in land development throughout the region. And that requires a great deal, as everybody on this panel and of course to all of our folks tuning in, that requires a great deal of faith in the economy and in the region when you start doing land development, because that's sometimes a 2 to 4 to 5 year process. So we saw that. I think, the traditional strip retail is still having a really tough time. the smaller office space was having a tough time. And what COVID and now Omicron and whatever comes after that, it has taught the office market, the retail market, the commercial markets, that they have to deal with what is the new paradigm. It's not going to go back. We need to go forward in a very different way. And I think we're seeing the smart landlords, the smart owners, the smart developers, all gearing themselves to understanding that COVID's not going to go away. It may just be treated in a different way. It may become the new flu shot. It may become whatever it becomes, but we have to deal with the fact that folks have changed their lifestyles, and I think in some respects, semi-permanently. I don't know that everybody really believes that they have to be in the office 5 days a week anymore, or they have to do certain things that they did or commute at the same time and do things like that. So I think overall in our market, I think 21 was a good year to respond. 20 was the year of uncertainty. And when you look at NAR and CoStar's outlooks, they're all very positive for the commercial real estate market.
Okay, hi. Thank you all. John, thanks for having me on the panel for the second year in a row. I'm looking forward to it. Happy New Year to everybody. I kind of just will narrow in on a couple of things I think, what we're seeing in our shop here. I think the COVID has actually opened up a ton of different opportunities. As you know, the residential market was hyper hot and drew people out of the city up to the northern suburbs. So what we're seeing is these new people that are buying houses in northern suburbs looking for opportunities in the area in the Hudson Valley. In my particular region, north, and I'll just kind of stay in my lane here because Bill and the other guys speak about the lower Westchester, but anything north of 287, I agree with Paul. It's very hot. We're seeing a lot of logistics centers. E-commerce is very hot in our area. We also are seeing, believe it or not, and I saw an article in the Business Journal today about restaurants coming and going. And I personally believe that we've been doing a lot of second generation restaurants where I believe the value play is, unfortunately, the first person didn't make it. They were paying too much rent and they had to walk away with leaving great equipment and great space behind. So the next person in is actually a value play. So I'm very optimistic about that sector. But back to the e-commerce. As you know, I'm a chairman of the planning board, and our town, we recently approved 1 million square feet of a logistics center. And before I even got to sign the plat, the property was flipped to an investor out of New Jersey who specializes in this. And he gobbled it up at a record price. I can't mention a price at this point, but I think Bill knows the deal as well. So we're seeing those kind of opportunities. The northern area has arrived along 84, and even north of that, we're seeing even the towns that were kind of bypassed for development because of the COVID influx of people coming through, heading to the Berkshires for their second homes, that these old sleepy towns along 22 and 9 and everything are starting to be found on the radar for opportunities. So I think it's a great time to be a broker. And I also think, unfortunately, with the evictions being lifted, we're going to see another wave of opportunities because the landlords are going to have to reset their portfolio with the banks. And good news, bad news. Good news is that might generate some opportunities for brokers here. Bad news is, there's going to be some evictions going on. But I think in some ways, this COVID has reset the landscape in a positive way for brokers to be aggressive. And I think even though they're talking about raising the interest rates, we're still historically low. So I'm extremely optimistic for the next couple of years of what's going on, even though the smarter people saying there's a recession coming, and that might even spur some more opportunities. So I'm very optimistic about what's going on over the next couple of years to be a broker. Thank you.
Bill, you want to chime in?
Sure. Thank you, John. And Tom, I want to applaud you and Houlihan Lawrence on your year-end market report. I thought it was very well done and very good insight. So if anybody hasn't had the chance to see it, Tom, you guys and the company are doing great work in that space.
Appreciate the kind words. Thank you.
And John, as a follow up to your question, the market is always nuanced. It's what gives all of us job security. It's never binary. But when we take into consideration key drivers of our industry, resoundingly, they point in a very positive direction. And that gives us a lot of confidence and enthusiasm for the market going into this year. So what would those be? First would be bankruptcies and foreclosures. And there are almost none. And those that are in workouts coming to successful conclusions. So we have very little distress in the market. Next, availability of capital to feed our industry. And there is no shortage of debt and equity. So that gives us a lot of comfort. And I think it's important to note that our major corporate institutions, drivers of business, have made commitments to the region that continues to support it. Morgan Stanley's doing a major capital investment in the property they own in Harrison. Regeneron continues to grow and expand. And the type of industries that we have are much more diverse than we've ever seen. We're not an IBM home court anymore. We have technology, finance, research, development, law, healthcare, all thriving. Now, as Paul mentioned, some are in the Tale of Two Cities, hospitality and retail are finding some difficult times, but a lot of really positive momentum going into this year.
Great. Kathy, what's happening in the Bronx?
Well, the Bronx during 2021 was very busy in terms of the industrial market, very strong industrial market. We have not got enough product for the amount of people who want to open distribution centers and things like that. The retail market, the Bronx is very peculiar because a lot of people are not on e-commerce as much as outside of the Bronx. So places like Fordham Road, Helen Parkway, White Plains Road, Burnside Avenue, Jerome Avenue, all did well. As a matter of fact, one of my clients, Portobello, his store on Jerome and Fordham was the highest grossing store he had, and his store was busy during the entire pandemic. The political climate in the city did cause some problems in terms of development. The crime issue obviously cannot be ignored. That was also an issue. And the vendor issue, where we have vendors on every corner and every street on a block, which we're trying to address. So the retail business, we don't have that many vacancies on most of our streets. Some like Throgs Neck, we have more than we have on Fordham Road, obviously. Our rents have stayed pretty stable. We're getting like $90 a square foot for one of our spaces on Fordham Road. And which I'm working with Arm Friedland with on that project. The medical sector, very, very strong. Home care. I just placed an agency from Texas who had 2 spots in the Bronx. They consolidated, they took 14,000 square feet on the Grand Concourse, and they paid $34 a square foot for it. And it's office space. And they're very strong. We have other home care agencies looking as well. And now as we're coming out of this a little bit, the daycare centers and the Head Starts are all coming up. I must have at least 8 daycare centers looking for locations in the Bronx. So I'm very optimistic about where we're going to be going in 2022. I think that we have Target coming to Fordham Road and below, what's it called, Zero Below. And we also have Burlington, and we have Marshalls, and we have TJ Maxx on Fordham Road. And of course, Apple opened in Bay Plaza, Apple store in Bay Plaza. So that's very strong Bay Plaza. There's no vacancies. So I think that we're going to do pretty good in 2022. I'm optimistic.
Okay, good. So as we know, there's not a whole lot of data available on Westchester County. So a lot of times we'll pivot and take data from New York City because Westchester benefits or doesn't benefit as New York City does. There is a Castle Systems which shows data in all of the big cities about number of people going into the office. And they measure that, you know, to go into a big office building in New York City anymore, you have to walk through a turnstile, show your ID. So they measure the clicks that go through. The most recent report dated the 24th of this month shows that there are approximately 30.1% of office occupancy in New York City. So roughly 3 out of 10 people are showing up to the office. Can any of you comment on what it's like in the office buildings in Westchester County or the Bronx or Manhattan? What is real occupancy? You know, I can tell you at our firm, we're probably at about 50 to 60% on a daily basis of people actually showing up to the office. Now for brokerage, you know, if you're in the, you can't be in the office too much because you're not out doing business. So there's a lag there. But if you're a task-oriented employee, what is real occupancy like for you guys who are out there in the trenches?
John, we're noticing that the occupancy levels that New York City are similar to what we're seeing here. They bounce between 20 and 40%. If you're looking for a mean or an average, it is probably closer to 30 because Monday and Friday are light. And with hybrid work, Tuesday through Thursday, we get a bit of a surge.
I happen to agree that I'm in Robert Weiss building, and you can tell by the cafeteria who's in or not. And Bill hit it on the head. Yeah, you know, they cut staff on Friday, because the cafeteria staff, but the parking lot is, you know, really a good number is 30%. We're seeing in the hallways, you hardly ever see anybody. And I know for Houlihan Lawrence, we have 15,000 square feet there, and it's like an every other day rotation they come in. So it's. I still think I'm hoping, I'm targeting, you know, St. Patrick's Day when I think we can see a new wave of people coming in. That's my hope anyway. But no, I think 30% is a good number, John, in terms of what we're seeing in our market.
John, up
Seems
in
a goal line. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I think, you know, obviously Bill is spot on in terms of what he's talking about. He's again completely wrong in not wearing a bow tie to this year's event, but he's usually spot on as it comes to real estate. But as relates to this office, I think this 3 out of 10, maybe, and sort of moderating on what Tom is talking about, I don't know that we're going to get above that 50% number, and I think it is going to be on an alternating basis, basically. Folks coming in as they need to come in, when they need to come in, instead of the traditional everybody's in by 8 or 9 o'clock and leaving by 5. I think the Monday and Friday paradigm, that ship has already sailed. I think folks understand that they can work from home or work remotely Monday and Friday. So I think we're going to see a truncated week, a work week. And I think folks are going to have to change the office buildings. Now there are the Class A office buildings that, you know, that are predominant in Westchester, not so much in Rockland and in Orange counties. I think some of the smaller offices where there are 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 person offices, because that's how their businesses are set up. I think you'll see a greater occupancy level with those smaller offices where having the manpower, the people power in the office makes a difference. But on some of the larger ones, and even in the law firms, I know on a law firm that I'm associated with, the partners have all been set up with equipment to work from home, to do what they need to do. They'll come in for depositions, they'll come in for conferences, come in for meetings like that. But I don't know that you need to sit necessarily in your office. I mean, here today, just on this panel, you know, I'm sure, you know, many of the folks watching this are watching this not in their office, but rather from home, from their home office and doing what they need to do. And it's also a matter of productivity, John. I think when people take a look at this and you can knock out 4 or 5 Zoom meetings in a morning, you couldn't do 4 or 5 meetings when you were going in person, getting in the car, going where you needed to go, dealing with traffic, parking, getting in and out of a building. So I think the ship has sailed on that. I don't know that occupancy rates above 50% are going to be something that we're going to see in the very near future.
Kathy, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, my office is in the Hutch Metro Center, Simone's development here in the Bronx. And because it's so much medical in our buildings, and we have RRS, and we've got diagnostic centers and labs and visiting nurse service, we're busy. Our parking lot is full all the time. People coming all day long. And the offices, the doctor's offices are all manned because they're medical, and these people just come to work because they have to come to work. In some of the other buildings, for example, like the courthouse, up until now, the government offices they were working from home. As a matter of fact, a friend of mine just became head of the Small Business Administration for the Eastern Region, Marlene Centrone, and she works out of 26 Federal Plaza. There is nobody at 26 Federal Plaza. She's working from home. They set her up in her apartment, and only immigration on the ground floor is occupied. So there's a lot of vacancies in Manhattan, but in the Bronx, most of our buildings, since they're not enormously big buildings, this is probably one of the largest complexes in the Bronx, the Hutch Metro Center. They're pretty full because of the medical component.
So a lot of office space over the last few years has been repositioned into alternate use, some of it medical, some of it has just been wiped out. I think that the size of the universe was in the mid 30 million square feet. I think right now we're somewhere around 29 million, Bill. Care to comment on the right size office market? What is the universe of space and square feet that we will actually use moving forward? I know we've been trending down over the last 10 years. What is right size if people are only coming in occasionally? What is the right size office space? And does someone who used to use 10,000 square feet need 10,000 square feet when their lease renews?
And we're seeing a wide range of responses to that. For the large corporate users, it hasn't actually materially impacted their footprint and aggregate space they might need, to the extent that they provide more space for their employees, more areas for meeting rooms, and shared community space has grown. So that really hasn't so far shown a material shift. By industry, below the corporate behemoths, that's where we're seeing a lot of wide range of response. Some firms can work remotely and others can't. The law firm industry, for instance, largely comes in and works at their desk. Some finance related, marketing related, insurance processing, health information processing has accelerated their move to remote and hybrid. And so they're dramatically reducing their space. So it'll be an interesting push and pull to see how it all shakes out.
John, you care to comment?
Listen, I agree with Bill. I think, we're seeing a lot of repurposing going on for these older B and C type office buildings that are struggling. I think there's a new set of eyes on these can be converted into some other use. And we're seeing really housing as an alternative to some of these buildings in a good way. So I think the future is going to be challenging. I don't think we have a clear path yet. And I'll give you my personal opinion. I think to be successful, you need to be in the office, and you got to get the young kids in the office collaborating on stuff. So I'm hoping that works out in the future. But at the end of the day, home services, I'm in charge of leasing all the offices for Houlihan Lawrence. And I have a directive to downsize our footprints and only do 3-year deals. So that's the outlook from the home services. Berkshire Hathaway is my as I move forward here to try to renegotiate deals. They won't let me go past 5 years, and the footprint's got to be reduced if we can on that. So I think that's going to see the trend in terms of the future of office. To Bill's point. Thank you.
Paul?
Yeah, I agree with Tom and agree with Bill. In general, I think some of the shift, an interesting sector that we don't often talk about is the nonprofit sector. And we've seen the nonprofit sector step up in many ways to acquire space and office buildings. Really, as we're seeing in Orange and Rockland and in parts of Westchester, almost following medical. And they're also not afraid, the nonprofit sector, to take space in the formally, in the formal retail spaces, storefronts and the like. So on the rental side, but we've seen a great uptick in acquisitions for nonprofits who have taken advantage now of, some empty office buildings and the like. So yeah, I think we're going to see a different paradigm, and I think as sort of morphing over, just back over to retail for a moment, I think we're going to just see more experiential and service centered tenants going into these shopping centers because they do have the parking, they do have the visibility, they're well located. So I think we're going to see that sort of fuzziness that they'll go back and forth between some of the retail locations, nonprofits in some of the office locations, and nonprofits actually owning. And at one point they did own, and then there was a big shift to just being in the rental market, and now taking a look at having those assets. So that's what we're seeing.
So with the change of administration in New York City, does New York City become more desirable again for investment? And I'll give you a story of, guys in the industry know that there have been certain family funds that have taken their investment out of New York City and specifically have been investing in Westchester, Fairfield, and Northern New Jersey. With the change of administration, they're now going back in to New York City. Do we find that New York City becomes more desirable now, Kathy?
Well, I worked with Eric Adams when he was running for mayor, and the Chamber of Commerce and HGAR, we had meetings with him, and he is very committed to changing the landscape and how business is done in New York City with developers, with owners, streamlining the entire process of Department of Buildings, HPD, all of the agency, EDC. He is definitely in favor of rezoning, but as always, there's always going to be conditions, community involvement. He's very much in favor of doing the kind of development by transit hubs. And we're getting 4 new Metro North train stations in the Bronx, and development around those locations is going to be very important. The problem we had with the last administration is that the governor and the mayor hated each other. And that kind of friction makes it almost impossible to do development. Affordable housing development went down for a period of time. It's coming back. I've got developers now calling me saying, try to find me some land, but the land is very expensive. I mean, it's going for ridiculous numbers out here, like $70 and $80 a foot, buildable foot. But because this mayor is committed to improving the entire environment with crime, he's going to be very tough on crime, and he's going to clean up the streets. The homeless issue, he's addressing that. He's going to commit to seeing that the boroughs have somebody at City Hall that they can talk to. Remember now, we have a brand new city council. We have brand new borough presidents. I mean, Ruben Diaz is a very good friend of mine. And he didn't run for mayor because he thought it was time to move out after 22 years of being in government. So we have a new borough president, we have a new mayor, we have a city council, quite frankly, that's extremely progressive. And the chamber, because I'm on the executive committee of the chamber, we're sitting down with them and trying to get them to at least listen to some of our positions on business and how to do business in New York and how they can help us and not always be against us, not against the real estate industry. The governor is going to work with this mayor. She's already spoken about the 421A. She's going to revamp it, but she's not going to get rid of it. There is talk about, obviously, there's a proposal that was put together on the taxes in New York City, on revamping the taxes. And that's going to have a very huge effect when they decide how they're going to move forward with that. But I think this mayor and this governor are going to work well together. And I think that's going to make people want to come back and do business in New York City. There's going to be conversions. He's already spoken about office buildings that are not able to do, fill the buildings anymore, but people are they're not all going back to work. I agree with everybody else. They're not all going to come back to work. So there's talk about converting some of those office buildings. And if you remember back in the 80s, we had a similar problem. Those of us who are older, and I was representing Fordham Plaza at the time, and they took DHCR, moved them downtown into a building that was vacant, and then the top floors were all converted into residential. So if you walk around Wall Street and all of the downtown area, there's a lot of baby carriages. That's because there's residential on top of those office buildings now. So I think we're going to be headed in that direction as well.
John, I think that what Kathy says is correct. I think there's going to be a positive movement towards the city of New York. However, I think you cannot unring the bell. The folks that have discovered Westchester, Rockland, Orange, Dutchess, Putnam, and have discovered how to make live, work, play a reality, they're not going back. And I think this is unlike anything that we've ever seen, where there have been, Kathy is right, where there have been some mayoral issues where people exodus the city for one reason or another, and Eric Adams and Governor Kathy Hochul seem to have the right sauce to make things work. And I think we will start to see more sustained investment back in New York, where they don't have to sort of justify why they're going back to New York. It'll be, the reasons are apparent. But boy, you cannot unring the bell in terms of what, and I think Bill and Tom will agree, you cannot unring the bell. They have found new pastures in Westchester, Rockland, Dutchess, Putnam, Ulster, and Sullivan, and said, we like it, we can make it work. And again, we go back to what you talked about earlier, John, maybe Mondays and Fridays are not real heavy go to the office work days. So all of those shifts are, I think, are permanent in some way.
Paul, I think you're spot on.
Is this being recorded? Is this being recorded? Because he said that.
Yeah, well, we're going to have to do some editing later, I'm sure. But no one or no region roots for New York City more than Westchester and the Hudson Valley. We need a vibrant, healthy, safe, prosperous New York. We're all in the same boat here. But Paul, your point on the migration out of New York is like that famous quote about Gretzky. He was never where the puck was, but he always knew where it was going.
Right.
And I think for our business, with what's happened with this incredible migration of thousands and thousands of skilled, employed, new, younger workforce to our region, addresses one of the biggest shortfalls we've had for the past decades, which is availability of a deep, skilled, white-collar labor force to support the growth and attraction of business. There's no doubt that that thread is going to be drawn, and that's where the puck's going.
Well said. Well said, Bill. I agree with you. I see. You know, my take on it is these natural resources and Joe Cotter repurposing the old IBM campuses in Kingston and East Fishkill. And he's attracting quality high-tech companies there because what Bill, you just shared with us in terms now the labor force is with us at a very high level. In fact, I would say 4 or 5 years ago, there was some reluctance to come up to our area to start a business because of the shallow labor pool that we had because everybody was down in the city. So Billy, you're spot on. I think that, you know, we're in a good place to attract even more medical type companies and biotech. I think we're really, once again, poised for a good couple of years with this talent pool that came up north.
Yeah, I mean, commercial always follows residential.
Right.
It's not the other way around. I mean, people think counterintuitively that you know, commercial comes to an area and then people move in. It's the other way around. The commercial, in this very broad sense, follows residential, and the migration and what Bill said, that movement of the white collar workforce and having folks that have pulled this together are where it's at. So.
All right, thank you all. We've got a question from the audience, and I will, can anyone comment on the pending legislation that could potentially adversely affect the commercial real estate industry? So, you know, one of the items that's pending is good cause eviction. That's one, but there are others. I mean, within the New York City Council, there is an undercurrent for commercial rent control. Kathy, I know you're deeply involved here, as you are, Paul. Do you guys want to comment on any of this pending legislation, and does it eventually get passed, or is it, you know, in a permanent hold?
We have, the chamber has been very, very, very vocal, and as have all the chambers in the city and the real estate board on this commercial rent control. We were able to stop it twice. We're going to try again, but this council is going to be extremely difficult. So that's why it's extremely important. Some people say this doesn't pay to talk to them because they're not going to listen to us. But if you don't talk to them and they don't know you and they don't get to know your point of view, you're not going to get them to do anything. So we sit down and we talk to them. I'm meeting with different ones, maybe every other week, especially the city council. I'm meeting with the assembly, but the city council is critical to this situation, especially with the commercial rent control. So yes, those are very serious issues. And I think that brokers, especially brokers who are with big commercial firms, have to get more involved in what happens in the legislature, because what happens in the legislature actually impacts us more than anything else. I mean, if the governor did not redo the 421A, we'd be in terrible trouble in terms of development at a time when we desperately need more housing. So I think that is very, very important to get involved with legislation and to work hard to see that it doesn't get past some of the things that are being talked about.
I think Kathy's right, obviously, and I think it's very important that we as industry leaders and influencers talk to everyone. You cannot assume that someone, because they have a label on them, is going to go one way or the other. Sometimes, you know, as the old speaker Tip O'Neill used to say, all politics is local. And when you can point out why something that sounds well-intentioned isn't really well delivered for their constituency, you can sometimes move things. And again, you know, Kathy talked about it earlier, but these elections have consequences. And I will tell you the two most significant elections, one is the election of Eric Adams as the mayor, who I think will serve as a tempering and a person with strong leadership skills and someone who understands how to deal with the city council. I think that he will effectively deal with the city council rather than ignore it. The last mayor did at his peril. But I think, and again, I'm not being political with a capital P, but clearly Kathy Hochul, who was the lieutenant governor, whose main part of her portfolio as lieutenant governor was dealing with economic development, understands these issues as nobody else does. And she has acquitted herself quite well throughout the state. And I think that she will also be the counter balance to the assembly, which is probably far more left than the Senate is. And so I think we really have to take a look strategically at these elections and say, who matters for this industry? And let's face it, real estate is the underpinning of the economy of the state of New York.
I just want to add one more thing. I want to say that we have been, when I was Bronx Manhattan Association of Realtors, we were always involved in politics. I have to say that HGAR has done an outstanding job, Mr. Haggerty and HGAR, because we had legislative meetings. We are involved with talking to elected officials and spearheading some of these discussions. So I think I want to commend HGAR for doing that.
I will say, though, all our organizations, from REBNY down to all the local boards, I mean, we were really asleep at the wheel when they passed the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act of 2019, which had a really disastrous effect on owners of multifamily properties. Now they're talking about good cause eviction. Is there a way to stop that? Because that will effectively grant someone tenancy for life. It will be impossible to evict someone.
Well, Paul,
what's happening with that?
Paul made it perfectly clear. You have to sit down and explain to them what impact it's going to have. It isn't just, for example, this mandatory that every employee who works in New York City has to be vaccinated. Well, I know companies who have supers, owner management people who have supers and people who are not vaccinated. You're not going to let that super go because he's not vaccinated. He's doing a great job because he wasn't vaccinated. So sitting down and talking is, like Paul said, you get them to listen. They'll see the other side of the situation. They'll understand that good cause eviction is going to hurt the small landlords, the small property owners, especially.
Okay. We've got another question from the audience. And that is, what is the right size of the commercial real estate market in Westchester and the area? In other words, I'm just reading here, are we overbuilt when it comes to office and retail, or are we not?
John, I'll take office. It's a numbers game. The office market in Westchester for Class A and B inventory is just over 28 million square feet. The vacancy rate is 22.6%. There's about 6 million square feet of vacant space. But let's look a little deeper. In the 28 million square feet in the market, approximately 20% is represented by owned properties where we show no vacancy. When you eliminate that within the calculation, your vacancy rate is closer to 30%. That's the real story.
Okay.
We need to have 2 million square feet of positive net absorption. Now could be through companies moving out or changing office to research and development or medical. We need 2 million square feet of inventory to be eliminated from the stock altogether. That's where we need to go. That would bring our market into equilibrium. That would bring price balance for new construction. And the question is, how long or what do we need to do to get there? With what's happening and trending, the discussion about getting to equilibrium wasn't even possible to have 5 years ago or 10 years ago. It's a realistic question now. And I think it's on the horizon in the next 2 or 3, maybe 4 years. It's very likely we're going to have 2 million square feet absorbed, and it's very likely that we're going to have 2 million square feet ripped out of the inventory.
Let me just jump on that, Bill. I agree 100% with you, but John, I think it really starts with the local municipalities and being flexible with their zoning. You're already seeing it along 287 with Bill's point about these office buildings being taken down, turning into Wegmans, turning into fitness centers. But it starts with the local municipalities to kind of embrace the new world we have here. And I think it's starting. I see, all along the train lines, we're getting, the transit-oriented development, they're inviting that. I think it slowed a little bit with the pandemic, but they're open to having discussions about repurposing what is old stock. And it's happening. And I think in the next year or two, you're going to see it's going to accelerate in terms of that pattern, because we need to reinvent ourselves. And it starts at a local level. And New York is the worst in terms of getting through approvals. So if there's any kind of legislative pressure we could put on things, it's painful. This is a very painful process. And as a planning board chairman, I see both sides of what goes on here. And I don't understand how people have, I'd leave the state myself if I had to spend 2 years getting approval on stuff like that. So I think there's got to be a more open dialogue on a local level and from the state level to help get development repurposed in a meaningful way. But I think it's happening. I think it's trending, and this Omicron variant of COVID has helped, I think, start that in a lot of ways. So I'm once again thinks it's a zoning issue that's going to unlock these opportunities.
John,
I'd like to hear from Paul and Kathy again, but I want to stop you there, Tom, and I want you to look at the same, what you just referenced there. So you're chairman of the planning board. You're also a real estate broker. Tell me about SECRA and your opinion of SECRA and how it affects development in using both lenses of the broker and also the planning board.
Okay, as a chairman board SECRA is a necessary evil, is the way I see it. But I think the process, and I'll be right up front here. I hope I don't get emails and messages. I truly believe it's not the local municipalities that are a problem. I believe it's the outside agencies trying to get through DOT, DEP, and DEC. That's where the roadblocks are. I truly believe that most towns embrace new development and try to help bring ratables to the town. But until we solve the state level issues of getting turnaround times in a more timely manner on these applications, this is not a fun state to deal with, John, at all. It's not a fun state to deal with, and it takes months. I mean, it took 2.5 years for a logistics center to get approved because of DOT, DEP, comment letters, and things like that. It's really a lot of brain damage and financially damaging here. As a broker, I kind of have a fun time doing this because I kind of see, and I set expectations as a broker because of my planning board background. I can say, listen, you got patient capital? Figure 2 years before you're in the ground here. If it pencils out within that 2-year period for a substantial project, then you got something to work with here. But I think it all starts with the underfunding and understaffing of the New York State agencies that are not turning things around in a timely manner that is stalling this progress in a big way.
Amen, amen, amen on what Tom said. We do find that, and again, Kathy has a different set of planning and zoning, and we sometimes wish we could be like New York City and have your planning and zoning setup. We don't. New York is a home rule state, and every village and town has a very important say in the police power of zoning and planning. I think some of the things we need to do require legislation where there will be more generic seekers available to local planning boards and town boards, so that more shovel-ready sites can be, can be accessed. I also think we need to understand the fact that when you have thousands of political subdivisions, towns, villages, fire districts, lighting districts, water district, state of New York agencies, county agencies, regional agencies, those things become very, very high hurdles to jump. And Tom is right. You have to set expectations for your clients looking to get involved in the entitlement process, you know, more so than outside of the city of New York. I know, Kathy, you have your own challenges inside the city of New York, but as it relates to what we're seeing in the suburbs, Orange, Rockland, Westchester, Sullivan, Dutchess, all of those things, we really do need to make sure that the planning boards and the zoning boards and the architectural review boards are more dynamic and are more fluid and able to do that. What happens is a municipality sets down, John, they set down a master plan. And the old paradigm, and Tom can tell me if I'm wrong, we're not going to look at that master plan for another 10 years. We're going to let that master plan stay in place for 10 years, despite what technology, despite what a major change in the market might bring. And so we're stuck in time. You know, zoning and planning is not a futuristic set of codes and regulations, but it's looking back, and you almost have to fit that past rather than zoning trying to meet the future of the kinds of clients that Bill and John and Kathy and Tom and everybody listening to this call want to bring. So we really do need to take a look at some dynamic changes that make zoning and planning intuitive and responsive rather than exclusionary, because exclusionary zoning always gets you what you don't want.
Okay, so someone commented before, I think it was Tom, said he's on a mission to renegotiate leases. He can't sign a lease longer than 5 years. He's looking for a 3-year lease. This goes out to everybody. It used to be that if you went to a bank, and we've got lenders in the audience today, if you went to a bank, he wants to look at your rent roll. He wants to see the term of your leases, the quality of your tenancy, how long they're going to be there, what they're spending. If people are only willing to sign a 3 or a 5-year lease, what does that do to the value of properties? And then also, what does that do to an owner's ability to finance that property?
I'll jump in here. I think we're going to see that over the next 6 months. I think there's going to be these marginal investors that came in over the last couple of years. There's going to be an equity call. And that's where the rubber's going to hit the road in terms of whether there's going to be opportunity for, as a broker, to kind of jump in here and bring in new fresh capital here. But I think it's going to have a tremendous impact because the strength of the lease drives value. And without, you know, as I call it, meat on the bone, a good 5 to 10 year deal, these 3-year leases are being looked at, in my opinion anyway, less favorably in terms of valuation issues with the banking world. And I think Paul and Bill can agree with me. It's going to be interesting to see how, and Bill said it earlier, it was good to hear that the banks are working with some of these long-time landlords to kind of work things out, because I've been through a couple of these crashes and it wasn't fun for the landlords. You're smiling at, Paulie, right? Those days. But I think we're in for a kind of a learning curve here to see how the banks react to the new world of 3-year leases.
Anybody else care to comment?
I would agree with Tom. You know, banks love credit and duration, and when the term is truncated for less than the duration of the note of the mortgage, it creates a greater risk. And yeah, people are going to have to manage into that, Tom. It's a very good point.
Okay. We've got another question from the audience here. The governor has talked about easing restrictions on converting hotels and offices to residential use in New York City so far. And that's really been the focus of her attention. We've recently had some hotels, significant hotels, close in Westchester County. You know, I guess it's a two-pronged question. Number one, can we get the governor to focus on moving the program up here, expand it geographically? Or number two, what's going to happen to all that land? Does that just become new development for residential? What's your opinion on that?
Well, I think that I'm not so sure the governor has a big role to play in terms of resi conversion from hotels outside the city of New York. You know, the city of New York is very unique. While people think of the city of New York as this very big independent government, it is burdened terribly by state control. And that's where the governor plays a larger role. But I will tell you that I have seen a lot of the folks in the real estate industry doing heavy outreach to the governor, both on the governmental and the political side, to get her to be very aware of these kinds of issues. And John, you're so right. When you look at the hotels that have closed, the hospitality locations that have closed in Westchester and throughout the whole Hudson Valley, I think that we're going to see again another shift. I think it was Bill who said at the beginning of the program, you know, that there's just going to be new opportunities being granted to all of us as things change. And I think we're going to need to see that. But then again, it goes back to what Tom said. This is where the local planning boards and the town boards and the village boards and the village planning boards all are going to have to start to look at these places and not just say, we're hoping something that we don't like doesn't come here. We're going to have to be proactive and say what we want to come to this location. Because if you take a look at the Rytown Hilton, or, you know, for example, somebody who lives in White Plains, or somebody who lives in Rockland County, or somebody who lives in Chappaqua can say anything they want about that. But that's up to the folks who live in that jurisdiction as to what they want. So even though we sort of tend to look at things in a more regional basis because we cover so much territory, again, all things are local and we're a home rule state, but planning boards and town boards and village boards need to put an effort into attraction rather than I'm just going to say no until I get what I want for use on a site like the Rytown Hilton, just using that as an example.
Okay. Anyone else?
John, this issue that relates to adaptive reuse, rezoning, master planning, there's just a huge dysfunction that takes place, unfortunately, and part of it is driven by the legislation and regulatory environment that drives real estate. And unless we're in a position to change those regulations and change legislation, we're only going to end up with the same messy soup. So I'm going to give a shameless plug. At the County Association, we've been working to come up with modifications to those regulations and new legislation to provide for things like more housing, more affordable housing, and an improved SHGAR process. And I expect sometime in the first quarter that white paper will be released. But it's really simple things when you think about it. And I'll digress for a moment. In SHGAR, there's a provision referred to as the presumption of validity. When a member of the community speaks before a planning board or common council, there's a presumption of validity. And the wives' tale is that a project that was being reviewed for approval, a woman showed up and said that she lived near a development and that her son would have to walk in the street because there was no sidewalk and it would be dangerous to do the project. The horror of the story is she didn't live at that address, she didn't have a child, and there was a sidewalk. But in the finding statement, the community input was characterized with a presumption of validity. So I think this just goes to, we need to deal with the facts, we need to deal with the truth, we need a better job to have the process be, clean and clear.
Agreed. All right, it is 11 o'clock, so our time is just about up. I want to thank everyone for participating in the panel today and for your insight. It's great. I'm looking at the comments here, and rave reviews so far for everybody. And I would say to those in the audience, as Bill just mentioned in his shameless plug for the County Association, the County Association, the Building and Realty Institute, HGAR, the BCW, all of these organizations are very involved in fighting for property rights. Different aspects, everybody's got a different tilt to it, but I would encourage everybody in the audience to get involved with your organization or organizations of choice and help make the change. Help get their better secret process, fight against good cause eviction, fight against whatever it is, and help our industry. Thank you all. Good to see everyone.
Thank you, John. Thank you,
Thank you, John. Thank you,
Thank
HGAR.
you for having me.
Thank you.
Paul,
everyone.
before we sign off, I just want to give a retort on the lack of a bow tie.
Yeah.
I don't think you understand how difficult it is for someone like me to button his top button.
That's a